The old lakeside lodge became almost silent after midnight. Outside, the pine trees swayed gently beneath a pale moon, and the wind brushed softly against the windows. Inside, only the faint hum of the heater and the occasional creak of old wooden beams reminded anyone that the building was still awake. It had been a long day. Our company had organized a weekend retreat, hoping to pull everyone away from deadlines and crowded offices. The rooms were limited, so sharing had become unavoidable. That was how I ended up sharing a small room with Miles Bennett, someone I barely knew beyond polite greetings in the hallway. 2 single beds stood against opposite walls. A small lamp glowed between them, filling the room with warm amber light before we finally turned it off. It wasn't entirely true. Sharing a room meant sharing silence. And silence had become the place where my memories spoke the loudest. Months earlier, someone I had trusted more than anyone had walked away without looking back. The betrayal hadn't been loud. There had been no dramatic fight, just quiet lies, unanswered messages, and the slow realization that I had been holding on to someone who had already let go. Miles didn't seem like someone who enjoyed unnecessary conversation. His voice carried an unexpected calm. Around 11, we turned off the lamp and climbed into our separate beds. The room disappeared into darkness except for thin lines of moonlight slipping through the curtains. I closed my eyes. Sleep refused to come. Every time I drifted closer, old memories returned. The promises, the empty apartment, the feeling that maybe I simply hadn't been enough. I turned onto my side. The mattress creaked softly. Across the room, I could hear Miles breathing slowly. Already asleep, I thought. Lucky him. Minutes stretched into hours. The digital clock beside my bed glowed faintly. 12:41, 1:08, 1:22. The numbers kept changing while my thoughts refused to stop. Outside, rain began tapping lightly against the window. The sound should have been comforting. Instead, it made the room feel even quieter. I pulled the blanket closer around myself and closed my eyes again. Without realizing it, exhaustion finally pulled me into an uneasy sleep. Dreams came quickly. They always did. Faces blurred together. Voices echoed through empty hallways. Someone promised they would never leave. Someone else walked away without saying goodbye. Then everything became cold. Very cold. Even inside the dream, loneliness wrapped itself around me until breathing felt difficult. Somewhere far away, I thought I heard someone calling my name. Then the dream dissolved. Half asleep, I became aware of another sound. Soft footsteps. Slow. Careful. For a moment, I wondered whether I was still dreaming. The mattress beside me shifted almost silently. My heartbeat immediately quickened. Before I could open my eyes completely, I felt something unexpected. A pair of careful arms gently wrapped around me from behind. Not tightly. Not urgently. Just enough to let me know I wasn't alone. Every muscle in my body froze. The room remained completely silent. I could hear the rain outside, the steady rhythm of another heartbeat behind me, the warmth of another person through the blanket. I didn't move. Neither did he. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke a single word. There was nothing frightening about the embrace. It felt strangely familiar, like comfort I had forgotten existed. Then I heard his voice, barely above a whisper. "I think you were having a nightmare." My breathing caught. I hadn't realized tears were still resting against my face until I lifted one trembling hand to wipe them away. "I'm sorry," I whispered automatically. "You don't have to apologize." His answer came gently. "I know what nightmares can do." There was something inside those words. Not pity. Recognition. As though he had once stood in exactly the same darkness. The silence returned. This time it felt different. Safer. Neither of us tried to explain the moment. Neither of us searched for the perfect words. Sometimes kindness arrived quietly enough that speaking only made it smaller. After another minute, Miles slowly loosened his arms. "I'll go back to my bed," he said softly. I surprised both of us when my hand reached back and lightly touched his wrist. "Wait!" The word escaped before I could stop it. He paused. I still couldn't find the courage to turn around. The sentence disappeared. How could I explain that? For the first time in months, I didn't feel completely alone. How could I admit that the quiet warmth behind me had calmed a fear I hadn't been able to silence on my own? I simply let my hand fall. "It's okay," Miles whispered. His voice carried no pressure, only patience. A moment later, he quietly returned to his own bed. The room became silent once again. Yet something had changed. The loneliness that usually filled every corner no longer felt quite as heavy. I stared into the darkness until morning slowly began to color the edges of the curtains. Sleep never fully returned. Neither did the questions. Only one remained, repeating softly inside my mind. Why would someone who barely knew me choose, at 1:30 in the morning, to hold me like I was worth protecting? Morning arrived gently, carrying pale sunlight through the curtains and filling the room with a quiet golden glow. For several moments, I remained still, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the night before had been nothing more than a dream. The memory felt too gentle to be real. Then I heard the soft sound of a zipper closing. Miles stood beside his suitcase, carefully folding a sweater before placing it inside. His movements were calm, almost practiced, as though every small action helped keep his thoughts in order. He looked toward me and smiled. "Morning." His voice sounded exactly the same as it had the evening before. No awkwardness. No embarrassment. No sign that anything unusual had happened. "Morning," I answered, sitting up slowly. For a second, I thought about mentioning the hug. The words reached the edge of my lips before quietly disappearing. Instead, I asked, "Did you sleep well?" He nodded once. "Better than I expected." A faint smile touched his face. "I hope you did too." I almost laughed at the question. Not because it was funny, but because it felt impossible to explain that the best part of my night had happened after the nightmare. "I managed," I replied. It wasn't exactly the truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Breakfast was served in a wooden dining hall overlooking the lake. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with warm bread and cinnamon filled the room. People laughed around us. Coworkers shared stories about hiking trails, board games, and plans for the afternoon. Miles carried 2 cups of coffee back to our table. "I remembered you didn't add sugar yesterday." I blinked. "You remembered that?" He shrugged lightly. "I noticed small things." The answer should have sounded ordinary. Instead, it settled somewhere deep inside me. It had been a very long time since anyone noticed the small things. The retreat continued with outdoor activities, but neither of us seemed interested in noisy competitions. Instead, we volunteered to organize supplies for the afternoon picnic. The work was simple: boxes, blankets, paper cups, quiet conversations. Sometimes we worked without speaking for several minutes. Strangely, the silence never became uncomfortable. Felt peaceful. Like sitting beside a calm river instead of trying to fill every moment with words. As we walked toward the picnic area, Miles suddenly asked, "Can I ask you something?" I looked at him. "You can always ask." He hesitated. "When you couldn't sleep last night." His voice became softer. "Were you remembering someone?" I stopped walking. The question wasn't cruel. It wasn't curious in the wrong way. It sounded careful, as though he would completely understand if I chose not to answer. After a long pause, I nodded. "Someone I trusted." Miles lowered his eyes for a moment. "I'm sorry." "He didn't leave all at once," I admitted quietly. "He disappeared little by little." I looked toward the lake. Some days I think that hurt even more. The breeze carried fallen leaves across the path. Neither of us spoke. Finally, Miles said something I never expected. "I know that kind of goodbye." His words were almost lost beneath the wind. I turned toward him. He wasn't looking at me anymore. His attention stayed on the quiet water stretching into the distance. "My fiancé ended our relationship 3 years ago," he said. "There wasn't another argument. No dramatic ending. He simply decided that the future we'd planned no longer included me." The sadness in his voice wasn't fresh. It had softened with time, but it hadn't disappeared. I spent months believing I wasn't enough. His confession echoed inside me. For the first time since my own heartbreak, someone wasn't trying to fix my pain. He was simply standing beside it. Somehow, that felt far more comforting. Over the next 2 days, our conversations became easier. We learned each other's favorite books, favorite music, favorite rainy day meals. Miles loved old bookstores. I preferred quiet beaches. He collected postcards from places he visited. I kept handwritten notes inside novels I loved. Neither of us realized how naturally friendship had begun replacing distance. Others noticed before we did. At lunch, one of our coworkers smiled as Miles sat beside me. "You two are becoming inseparable." I immediately looked down at my plate. Miles simply smiled politely. "We just enjoy quiet company." The comment sounded simple, yet my heart reacted in a way I didn't fully understand. Later that afternoon, I found myself searching the crowd whenever Miles stepped away. If he disappeared for more than a few minutes, I noticed. If he returned, I relaxed. The realization unsettled me. I had promised myself never to depend on another person again. Promises made after heartbreak often sound strong, until someone kind quietly begins breaking down the walls around them. That evening, we sat on the dock overlooking the lake. The sky burned orange before slowly fading into deep blue. A family of ducks drifted peacefully across the water. Miles skipped a small stone across the surface. "I used to think healing meant forgetting," he said. "What do you think now?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "I think healing means remembering without bleeding." His words settled over the lake like the evening light. I didn't answer immediately, because somewhere inside me, I realized I hadn't reached that place yet. Every memory still carried sharp edges. But maybe they didn't always have to. That night, back in our shared room, neither of us mentioned what had happened at 1:30 a.m. Not because it didn't matter, because it mattered enough that neither of us wanted to rush its meaning. We simply wished each other good night. Miles switched off the lamp. Darkness gently filled the room once more. This time, sleep came easier. Not because my past had disappeared, but because I knew someone who understood it was only a few steps away. The retreat ended 2 days later. We packed our bags and loaded them into the company shuttle. As the lodge disappeared behind rows of tall pine trees, I looked out the window and felt an unexpected ache. I wasn't leaving the place behind. I was afraid of leaving whatever had quietly begun there. When the bus stopped outside our office building, everyone went their separate ways. Miles adjusted the strap of his backpack before turning toward me. "I'll see you Monday?" The question sounded casual, but I found myself smiling before I even realized it. "I'll be looking forward to it." He nodded once. "So will I." He walked toward the parking lot, and I watched until he disappeared from sight. Only then did I realize something that both frightened and comforted me at the same time. Somewhere between that silent midnight embrace and our quiet conversations beside the lake, I had stopped waiting for the day to end. Instead, I had quietly begun waiting for the next time I would see Miles. Monday arrived with its usual rhythm of ringing phones, glowing computer screens, and hurried conversations in the office hallways. Yet something inside me had changed. For months, I had walked into the building feeling invisible. Now, without admitting it to myself, my eyes searched for one familiar face before I even reached my desk. When I finally spotted Miles across the office, talking with the receptionist while balancing a cup of coffee, an unexpected sense of relief settled over me. He looked up. Our eyes met. His smile appeared almost instantly. "Good morning," he called. "Morning," I answered, trying to sound calmer than I felt. It was a simple exchange. Still, it somehow made the entire room feel warmer. The days that followed slipped into a comfortable routine. Every morning, Miles left a cup of coffee on the corner of my desk before I arrived. Sometimes there was a sticky note attached. "Don't skip breakfast today." Or, "The weather says rain. Bring your jacket." Tiny messages. Nothing romantic. Nothing dramatic. Yet I found myself saving every single one inside the drawer of my desk. I couldn't explain why. Maybe because kindness always feels precious after you've spent too long believing you didn't deserve it. One Friday afternoon, our manager announced a new project. Several departments would work together for the next 2 months. Teams were assigned almost immediately. I secretly hoped Miles and I would end up together. Instead, his name appeared beside someone else's. Nathan Brooks. Nathan was confident, outgoing, and effortlessly charming. People naturally gathered around him. He laughed loudly, spoke easily, remembered everyone's birthdays. The entire office seemed to enjoy his company, including Miles. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. They were simply coworkers, nothing more. But over the next week, I noticed things I wished I hadn't. They ate lunch together, stayed late discussing presentations, walked out of meetings side by side. Sometimes Nathan rested a friendly hand on Miles' shoulder while they laughed about something I hadn't heard. Each small moment felt harmless. Yet together, they quietly built a story inside my mind. A story I had no evidence to believe. The worst part wasn't jealousy. It was recognition. I had seen this before. Years earlier, someone I loved had slowly begun spending more time with another person. First, I ignored it. Then I questioned it. Eventually, I learned I had been the last person to realize the relationship was already ending. Old fears rarely knock before entering. They simply return. Without meaning to, I began pulling away. When Miles invited me to lunch, I claimed I had too much work. When he suggested coffee after work, I politely declined. When he texted to ask whether I had reached home safely, I answered with only 2 words. I'm fine. Nothing more. Each message became shorter. Each conversation ended faster. I convinced myself I was protecting my heart. In truth, I was protecting myself from something that hadn't even happened. Miles noticed. Of course he did. One evening, as I packed my bag, he quietly walked toward my desk. Did I do something? His question was gentle, almost careful. I avoided his eyes. No. You've barely spoken to me all week. I've just been busy. He smiled sadly. You've never lied very well. I froze. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he asked, Will you walk with me? Against my better judgment, I nodded. The evening air felt cool as we crossed the parking lot. Cars passed quietly beyond the office gates. For several minutes, we simply walked. Eventually, Miles stopped beside a small park. Golden leaves drifted across the path between us. I miss talking to you, he admitted. The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. I didn't realize that would matter. It matters more than you think. His answer came without hesitation. I looked away. If you're happier spending time with someone else. The sentence escaped before I could stop it. Miles frowned. What? I took a slow breath. Nathan. Understanding slowly crossed his face. Then, to my complete surprise, he laughed. Not loudly. Not cruelly. Just softly, almost in disbelief. You think this is about Nathan? I felt embarrassed immediately. I shouldn't have said anything. No. He shook his head. I'm glad you did. He leaned lightly against a wooden fence. Nathan is engaged. I blinked. What? He talks about his fiancée almost every day. I stared at him. I didn't know. You never asked. His smile faded. But that's not really the problem, is it? I remained silent. Miles studied me for a long moment. Finally, he spoke so quietly I almost missed the words. Someone convinced you that being left behind is inevitable. The truth settled between us. Painfully accurate. I swallowed hard. My last relationship didn't end all at once. I know. It ended one conversation at a time. One canceled plan. One delayed reply. One excuse. I looked down at my hands. So when I saw you laughing with someone else, my voice cracked. My mind finished the story before my heart had a chance to ask questions. Miles stepped a little closer. Not enough to invade my space. Only enough to remind me I wasn't standing there alone. I can't promise life will never hurt you again. His eyes never left mine. But I can promise something else. What? His answer came almost as a whisper. You're not losing me. He paused. Unless you decide to let me go. The words struck something deep inside me. For a brief moment, every defense I had carefully built over the past year threatened to collapse. I wanted to believe him. More than that, I wanted to trust him. But trust had become the hardest language for my heart to speak. That night, sleep refused to come once again. The office, Nathan, the conversation in the park, and Miles' quiet promise repeated endlessly in my mind. I walked onto the balcony of my apartment. Rain clouds covered the stars. The city lights shimmered below. My phone vibrated. A single message. From Miles. You don't have to answer tonight. I just wanted you to know that I meant every word. I stared at the screen for a long time. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. I typed a reply. Deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that one too. How could I explain that I wasn't afraid of loving him? I was afraid of surviving another goodbye. I locked my phone and looked into the darkness. For the first time since meeting Miles, I realized something that frightened me more than jealousy. The quiet truth was impossible to ignore now. Somewhere between shared mornings, lakeside conversations, and one unforgettable embrace at 1:30 in the morning, I had fallen in love. And that made the possibility of losing him feel more terrifying than anything I had faced before. Autumn settled over the city almost without warning. The trees outside the office windows turned shades of amber and crimson. The mornings became colder, and people arrived carrying warm coffee instead of iced drinks. Everything around me seemed to be changing. Everything except the question that had followed me since the retreat. Why had Miles come to my bed that night? Weeks had passed since our conversation in the park. Slowly, the distance between us disappeared again. We shared lunches, walked together after work, sent each other articles about books we wanted to read. Sometimes we spent entire evenings talking without noticing how late it had become. Yet neither of us mentioned the night that had started everything. It remained between us like a quiet page waiting to be turned. One Saturday afternoon, Miles invited me to a small bookstore hidden between two old brick buildings downtown. The shop smelled of aged paper and cedar wood. Soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers. Only a handful of customers wandered between the shelves. This place feels frozen in time, I whispered. Miles smiled. That's why I love it. We wandered separately for a while before meeting again near a window overlooking the street. Rain tapped gently against the glass. The weather reminded me of the retreat, of the lodge, of one impossible night. Before fear could stop me, I spoke. Miles. He looked up from the novel in his hands. Can I ask you something? Always. I took a slow breath. That night. His expression softened immediately. The retreat. I nodded. The hug. Silence settled around us. Not uncomfortable, only careful. I've wondered about it every day, I admitted. What made you come over to my bed? For a long moment, Miles simply looked at the rain outside. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost a whisper. You were crying. I frowned. I don't remember. You probably wouldn't. He gently closed the book he was holding. You weren't awake. My heartbeat slowed. I heard you. His eyes remained on the rain. You kept saying one sentence over and over. What did I say? He hesitated. Please don't leave me. The words stole the air from my lungs. I closed my eyes. Somewhere deep inside, I remembered fragments of that nightmare. The empty apartment. The unanswered phone. The loneliness. I've had that nightmare before, Miles continued quietly. Not the exact same dream, but the same feeling. He looked at me for the first time since beginning his story. I recognized the sound of someone believing they were completely alone. Neither of us moved. The bookstore seemed to disappear around us. Only his voice remained. I woke up because I heard you crying. I walked toward your bed because I thought you might wake up. He smiled sadly. But when I saw your face, his eyes filled with emotion. I remembered myself. He swallowed carefully. I remembered nights when I wished someone had simply reminded me I wasn't facing everything by myself. A tear escaped before I could stop it. "So you hugged me?" He nodded. "I wasn't trying to change your life. I wasn't expecting anything. I just couldn't walk back to my own bed pretending I hadn't heard your pain." His honesty broke something open inside me. Not something fragile. Something locked away for far too long. I lowered my head. "I'm sorry." He looked surprised. "For what?" "For carrying all of this alone." My voice shook. "For believing I had to." Miles slowly stepped closer. "You survived the only way you knew how." His words carried no judgment, only compassion. "I wish someone had told you earlier that surviving doesn't always have to be lonely." The tears I had hidden for months finally came. Not loud. Not dramatic. Quiet tears that had waited patiently for permission to exist. Without saying anything else, Miles gently placed a hand over mine. This time I didn't pull away. We left the bookstore after the rain stopped. Instead of driving home, we walked through a nearby park. The sidewalks shimmered beneath the afternoon light. Children laughed in the distance. Dogs chased fallen leaves. Life continued around us as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet everything inside me felt different. "I've been afraid," I admitted. "Of what?" "That if I loved someone again." I searched for the right words. "I'd lose myself trying not to lose them." Miles nodded slowly. "I know." I looked at him. "I've been afraid too." "You?" He smiled faintly. "I've been afraid that caring about you would make your healing harder." I stopped walking. "What do you mean?" "I never wanted you to feel pressured." He looked down at the path. "You deserved the freedom to heal because you wanted to, not because someone was waiting at the finish line." His kindness overwhelmed me. Every thoughtful silence, every patient conversation, every morning coffee, every tiny note. None of it had asked for anything in return. We reached the small wooden bridge crossing the park pond. The water reflected the soft evening sky. I turned toward him. "Miles." He met my eyes. "I don't think I'm standing here because I need someone to rescue me anymore." He waited quietly. "I'm standing here because—" The words trembled. "Because somewhere along the way, I fell in love with the person who never asked me to become someone else." His eyes widened slightly. For one heartbeat, neither of us breathed. Then he laughed softly through tears. "I was beginning to think I'd have to keep loving you in complete silence." I blinked. "What?" His smile became brighter than I had ever seen. "I fell in love with you long before that conversation in the park." He shook his head gently. "Maybe even before the retreat ended." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You never said anything." "I didn't want my feelings to become another weight you had to carry." His answer was simple. "I wanted you to choose freely." The world around us seemed impossibly still. The wind slowed. The water barely moved. Everything narrowed until only Miles remained. I stepped closer. "So," I whispered, "what happens now?" He smiled the same quiet smile that had first made me feel safe. "Now." He opened his arms just enough to let me decide. "Only if you want to." There was no hesitation this time. I closed the small distance between us. The embrace felt different from the one at 1:30 in the morning. That first hug had protected a broken heart. This one welcomed a healing one. As the evening sun slipped behind the trees, I finally understood something I had spent months searching for. Love hadn't arrived with grand speeches or perfect timing. It had arrived quietly, through patience, through kindness, through one gentle embrace in the middle of the night that simply said, "You are not alone anymore." Winter arrived slowly, wrapping the city in crisp mornings and long, peaceful evenings. The trees that had once glowed with autumn colors now stood bare against pale skies, waiting patiently for spring. Life had settled into a gentler rhythm. It had been 6 months since that afternoon in the park. 6 months since I finally understood why Miles had crossed a quiet room at 1:30 in the morning. Some memories become smaller as time passes. That one only became more meaningful. Love didn't change our lives overnight. Monday mornings still came too early. Traffic still filled the roads. Work deadlines still crowded our calendars. We still argued over which coffee shop made the better latte. He insisted it was the little cafe near the river. I claimed the bakery near my apartment deserved the title. Neither of us ever truly won those debates. Maybe we didn't want to. Those tiny disagreements made ordinary days feel wonderfully alive. The greatest change wasn't around us. It was inside me. For the first time in years, I no longer woke with the quiet fear that everyone I loved would eventually leave. That fear hadn't disappeared completely. Some scars never vanish. They simply stop controlling every decision. Whenever old doubts returned, Miles never rushed to erase them. He would quietly take my hand, or sit beside me without speaking, or simply ask, "Do you want company?" Sometimes healing begins with words. Sometimes it begins because someone stays. One snowy evening, we returned to the lakeside lodge where everything had begun. The company had organized another winter retreat. As we stepped through the familiar entrance, memories greeted us before anyone else did. The wooden floors still creaked beneath our feet. The fireplace still filled the lobby with gentle warmth. Outside, the lake rested beneath a thin layer of ice, reflecting the silver light of the moon. "It hasn't changed much," I whispered. Miles smiled. "Maybe that's why it feels like coming home." When we collected our room keys, the receptionist looked down at the reservation list before smiling apologetically. "I'm afraid we only have one of the same rooms left." Miles looked at me. "Is that okay?" I laughed softly. "I think we'll survive." The room looked almost exactly as I remembered. 2 single beds. The small wooden table. The lamp between them. Even the curtains seemed unchanged. For several quiet moments, neither of us unpacked. We simply stood there, letting old memories settle gently around us. Finally, Miles broke the silence. "Do you remember what you asked yourself that morning?" I smiled. "I remember. You wondered why someone who barely knew you would hold you like you were worth protecting." I nodded slowly. "I never forgot." He walked toward the window and looked outside. "I wish you had known then what I know now." "What do you know now?" He turned toward me. "That you were always worth protecting." The words reached every place inside me that loneliness had once lived. That evening, snow began falling outside. Soft flakes drifted past the window like tiny pieces of light. We made tea and sat beside the glass, watching the quiet landscape disappear beneath white blankets. "I've been thinking," I said. "About what?" "My old relationship." His expression remained calm. "Does it still hurt?" I considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But not in the same way." He waited. "I used to remember the betrayal." I looked toward the falling snow. "Now I mostly remember surviving it." "That's healing." I nodded. "And then I remember something else." "What?" I looked at him. "If that heartbreak had never happened." My voice softened. "I might never have been in this room with you." He reached for my hand. Neither of us said anything else. Some moments become complete without another word. Later that night, we prepared for bed. Just like before. The room grew quiet. The lamp switched off. Moonlight slipped through the curtains. I lay awake for a few minutes, listening to the peaceful silence. Then I heard familiar footsteps. Slow. Careful. "You don't have to borrow it anymore." He sat beside me, and I wrapped my arms around him first. This time, there were no nightmares waiting in the darkness. Only warmth. Only trust. Only 2 hearts that had learned how to rest without fear. The next morning, sunlight reflected across the frozen lake. We packed our bags before leaving the lodge one final time. As we walked toward the parking lot, I stopped and looked back at the building. "So much started here," I said quietly. Miles slipped his hand into mine. "It started before here." I looked at him curiously. "When?" "The first moment you believed you still deserved to be loved." His answer stayed with me long after we drove away. Because he was right. Love hadn't healed me by pretending my pain never existed. It had healed me by sitting beside that pain until it became lighter to carry. People often imagine love arriving with grand gestures, perfect timing, or unforgettable speeches. Mine arrived differently. It arrived through shared silence, through cups of coffee left on my desk, through patient conversations that expected nothing in return, through someone who listened more than he spoke, and through one quiet embrace at 1:30 in the morning, when I believed no one could hear the loneliness inside me. Looking back now, I understand that betrayal was never the final chapter of my story. It was only the chapter that taught me to recognize genuine kindness when it finally found me. If someone listening to this story feels broken, abandoned, or afraid to trust again, I hope they remember one simple truth. The end of one love is not always the end of your chance to be loved. Sometimes the heart needs time before it recognizes the person who has been walking gently beside it all along. And sometimes, the person who quietly reaches for you in your darkest hour becomes the reason you believe in tomorrow. Thank you for listening. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Until next time, take care of yourself, and never stop believing that quiet kindness can change a life.